Hi, I'm Kim from Social Work Your Life, and we're here again with Brianna. We are finishing up this series on love and what real love looks like and what real love is.
Like I said too, I think there's always different variations of love, and just because, my story hasn't panned out the way that one would hope, I think there's still always hope to have successful relationships. Anyways, I'll throw that plug in there.
So where we left off, you're now leaving the hospital and you're going to your grandmother's house, and your husband is going back to the home you lived in together, presumably to get that ready, and he's quote unquote working, and you're now separated basically as a new mom, brand new mom coming home from the hospital with the baby.
Yeah, not an ideal situation, and there was a lot of denial on my end of things. He had fully relapsed with drugs and alcohol, and he was starting to have, we'll just say, bigger bouts of psychosis, a lot of paranoia. I mean, to the point of, unfortunately for him, he ended up gutting our house, taking off drywall, ripping out piping, looking for cameras, because he was convinced that, the neighbors and the government were spying on him.
But wait, he was the one who put the walls up.
He was the one who put all the walls up. Yeah, I mean, I fully recognize.
But this is psychosis.
He was not thinking clearly, and he was having a lot of paranoia, and he couldn't think clearly. He couldn't rationalize. So he gutted our house, and a date that I will probably never forget is January 10th of 2020. I ended up 302ing him. And at the time...
Wait, let me just pause for a moment for people who don't know what a 302 is. A 302 is when you make somebody go to inpatient treatment against their will based on things they've said or things they've done that have shown that they are a danger to themselves and others. And it needs to be approved by a court. You can't just 302 anybody. It needs to be approved by a judge. It's a thing, right? And there are bigger implications to 302ing somebody, they can no longer carry a gun ever, and there's other laws that go around it too. So 302ing is it involves a hospital, involves a doctor, it involves lots of things. A judge.
Yep. Unfortunately, he was just at the point of one of the worst case scenarios of where he was in his mental state, and that was the only way that we were going to be able to get him help. So, that morning, the 10th of January, we got up, and he was just having such strong paranoia.
Where you got up? You got up? We said we got up.
So the night prior, he had come to visit Jameson, and he had stayed the night.
Okay.
And he woke up that next morning, completely just not in a normal state, just super paranoid. My dad came over, and he was trying to get my dad to promise to always take care of Jameson and I, always protect us. And, that morning I really just made the decision of, okay, this is it. I need to do something. So, and I don't want to say I didn't have those thoughts before. I knew he needed help. But if somebody doesn't want treatment, in many cases you can't force it. But we had gotten to such a point in which, if he did not go into treatment, somebody was going to get hurt, because, like I said, the paranoia was so strong, and he thought people were after him, and God help me, I would never want him to be in a paranoia state and hurt somebody.
Or snag Jameson because he thinks something's going to happen, and then...
Right. I mean, and you just don't know. You just don't know. So, I went to our local crisis center because there was absolutely no way I was getting him to our emergency room. I filed the paperwork, I petitioned, and the petition was upheld. So, I made my way back home. He was back at my grandmom's, and an ambulance showed up, and they did take him to our local emergency room. They did their evaluation, and it was at that point that I found out in totality that, yes, he had relapsed and that he was on drugs. Up to that point, I still had not found anything myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think, intellectually I knew, but there was no evidence until that point. And things changed after that. You
mean with your relationship with him?
I think in all senses, not just my relationship with him, but I think I started to change a little bit. And I can't really pinpoint how. I think my heart was slowly, incrementally breaking along the way. And that day that I had to 302 Jimmy, that broke my heart. Nobody wants to ever have to force somebody into treatment, and this was just unfortunately a scenario that it was warranted. And there was a lot of mixed emotion. I felt guilty, and I'm not really sure why I felt guilty. I think I'm a social worker by trade, and I thought that maybe I could fix him with the tools in my toolbox. And it's just not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think too, just in my gut, I just knew this was not going to turn out how I wanted things to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also at that moment, our daughter was 12 weeks old at that point, that it really started to set in oh boy, if he doesn't accept this treatment and continue with treatment, I have to make some really big decisions. And, it's also kind of blurry in my mind of all that happened because it was just so much. I literally had only been back to work 1 week when this happened. So it just, it was chaos. It was just chaos. And, he did go to inpatient psych, and from inpatient psych, he did go to a drug and alcohol program in which he went to that program for 24 hours and signed out AMA. And I feel I strong held him back to the facility, and he signed back in, I think for 2 weeks, and then he signed out AMA again, and he went back to our house, and God bless my dad, he went down to our house, and he didn't want to go back to treatment. And I had said to my dad, you can't force him. I said, if he doesn't want to go, then you leave him there and you can come home. And God bless my dad, because my dad did somehow convince him to go back to treatment again. But it was only for about 2 weeks, because at that point insurance had cut. And, my stance to him was, we will continue to be supportive in your life, but you have to go to sober living. You have to be an IOP, work a program.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you now at this point have 2 weeks of sobriety under your belt, and you're literally going back into the real world, and it's not going to be so gracious. Like, you need to work a program. And my stance had always been like, you work a program and you do what you need to do, and we are going to be in your lives. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out the way that I wanted, which, again, I couldn't force him to make specific decisions. He went to sober living for all of, I think, 1 hour.
Really?
Before he left. And from there, he didn't go back to treatment. And I do think for a period of time he did try on his own. And when I say think, like, I know he was trying. He was trying to work a job with someone that he knew. He was trying to live a sober life. But it's not that easy, I mean...
Especially now with the stuff he was taking.
Yeah, and the disease of addiction just has such a strong hold on people. And, through this course of time, so many people would literally say, well, how are you not mad? And in that entire time, there wasn't once that I was actually angry. It's more of just sadness. And I think I wasn't angry because coming from my background and recognizing...
Which does have addiction in it.
Right. Yep. And just, recognizing that, addiction is a disease, and I just can't explain it. I wasn't angry. I understood that his addiction was overpowering him. And, for the next few months, we did try and do supervised visitation. But, unfortunately, he just kept going downhill. And, he would always say to me, Brianna, if you just take me back and we work on this together, like, I would be sober. And, my stance always was, no one can make you be sober. Like, no amount of love in the world can make you be sober. Like, you have to want this for yourself. Like, myself, our daughter Jameson, like, we can love and want this for you all we want. However, like, you're the one who really has to put in the work and want it for yourself. And, it didn't pan out. And thankfully, I was heavily involved in a support group with that catered towards families, friends who loved someone in addiction. It didn't matter if they were in treatment, in recovery, or active addiction. And, so I had that group of people, and I learned so much about my own recovery. And, one thing that I actually tell people all the time in the support group that I'm still actively involved in is, your recovery from your addict is never going to be linear. Just like, if your addict is in recovery, their recovery is never going to be linear. Your recovery is also not going to be linear. There's always going to be ups and downs. But at the end of the day, you still... I say that, that addict is the speedboat, and you are the person on the skis in the back, holding on for dear life, and you're being pummeled. They're driving that speedboat as fast as can go, and you are just like face first, being dragged by the water, and you're holding on to those handles like you're white knuckling it, not letting go because you just can't. And at a certain point, I did. I released. I couldn't handle, everything that was happening. I couldn't watch him go down that path anymore. And not only that, we had a baby and I wanted to protect her. I didn't want her to accidentally get some sort of drug residue on her. I didn't want him to panic in a part of psychosis and run with her in his arms. And I had to make a very hard decision. And that decision was that, we would continue to be in his life if he was actively seeking treatment. But if he wasn't, then we weren't going to see him. And, I think, there's a lot of opinions about that. There are some people who will say, well, that's inhumane that you guys wouldn't see him. That's inhumane that you wouldn't let him see his daughter. But at the end of the day, she was a baby and she could not defend herself.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the sure way of making sure that nothing would happen to her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I won't lie, that was a very devastating decision for me
Mm-hmm.
that I had to make. And, leading up to that point, I think, you instinctively know, decisions are going to have to be made, but you kind of just always hope, oh, I hope it doesn't get to this point. I hope it doesn't get to this point. But it got to that point, and I had to make that decision. And
what did that decision look like?
For me, a lot of crying.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a few solid months of just crying and being heartbroken. And still in disbelief that this is how our lives were turning out. I mean, when you look back at, sober, healthy Jim was such an amazing person. Such an amazing person.
Mm-hmm.
The love of my life, amazing person. And addict version, was a lot harder to deal with. And it's really difficult to watch someone that you love go down a path that you don't want to see them go down.
Mm-hmm.
But again, at the end of the day, you can't force someone to seek sobriety. You can't force someone to work a program.
No.
And his addiction and psychosis just got worse. I mean, he literally, at one point, I had to have the North Carolina State Police track him down, stranded on a highway down there. He
was in Mexico.
Found himself in Mexico. Again, just you gotta be kidding. He found himself, unfortunately homeless down the Florida Keys. And I think it was probably late summer late this past summer. So
Wait,
summer.
before we get there, when did you have him sign off his rights to Jameson?
That happened late spring, early summer of 2021.
Okay.
So, I mean, I shouldn't have laughed, but I do laugh when I tell people my support group, when I share my story. I came into 2021 like a wrecking ball, because there's things I've left out. His addiction caused a lot of chaos. In a matter of months, I essentially lost, my husband. I became a single mom, had to file for bankruptcy. We lost our house. And I was trying to figure out who I even was as a person anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just already so much loss in such a short period of time that I literally say I was ass barreling my way through life at that point. It just was not graceful. It was not graceful by any means. a lot of ugly crying. I mean, like the deep, like ugly, you can't even talk crying. And just so much grief and sadness of...
But I also want to cut you off and say, the whole time this is happening, you are still working.
I was still working full time.
She was still working full time, showed up every day, did her job, was completely to the nth degree professional. Like, never once saw this happening because she was stoic to the point of like, right, so the crying, if it happened in your office, we never saw it, but for the rest of us on your team or on the team, we never saw that coming out. Like,
yeah.
So what day did he sign off on his rights?
I don't remember the exact day.
Okay. What was that day like for you?
It was just another heartbreaking moment in life, you know. And I also look back to thinking too, like he signed off for a reason. And here's the thing, like he didn't sign off on his rights. He signed off on me having full physical and soul custody. And he signed off on it. And, you know, I remember echoing at that time, you know, I'm not trying to take Jameson from you. I still, you know, I love you. I will always love you. You need help. We need to get you in treatment. And it just wasn't something that he was interested in. And, you know, anyone who's dealt with someone that they love an addiction, you know, there's a lot of things that are kind of said along the way that, you know, that sober healthy version of that person would never say. And I think I've always kind of like rationalized that, you know, sober healthy Jimmy wouldn't have said X, Y, and Z. But I also recognize he did sign off. Mm-hmm. And he did that for a reason. And I can only think that, you know, he knew he wasn't in a good place. And in that moment, you know, he signed, you know, custody to me.
How did you react?
Oh my God, I sobbed. The poor mediator. I literally sat sobbing in the mediator's office after he left, because once he signed, he kind of immediately left and kind of just left me there, still, again, shocked that, gosh, this is really happening. Okay. Yeah. I feel like I say the poor people along the way that did have to encounter me when I was crying, because, you know, when you see someone in that kind of pain, it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And you don't always know what to say, because I think people also recognize that no matter what they say, it's not going to make anything better.
Right.
And, you know, unfortunately, that was one of those moments where, you know, I was not crying in the private place of my own home / my grandma's home, because that's where I was staying. And I sat there for a while, just crying, and then I pulled myself together because I had to go get Jameson. Mm-hmm. And I just kept plugging along. And, you know, through all of that, I never stopped loving Jimmy. Like, to this day, like, I so much love Jimmy. I'm always going to love him. And I think that's where some of that misunderstanding comes, that, like, someone's putting you through this chaos. How could you possibly still love that person? And I think it still just goes back to, you know, when I said there's different variations of love, but there's also this soul love in which, like, you just, two souls are just connected in a specific way, that it's just this natural, strong love. And that was the type of connection that Jimmy and I had. And I recognize that it might be hard to understand for some people. And because I can't describe it. There are no words to kind of describe that encompassing love.
So let me fast forward. I'm going to pull you back. Right, so we're fast forwarding. So we went through 2021, right?
Yeah.
And then we move, and he's all over the world, sort of. He's in
all over the map.
He's in Mexico,
Florida.
You paid once for him to come home. His sister paid once for him to come home.
I think his aunt paid for him to come home.
Okay.
I don't think his sister. I think it was his aunt.
And you.
And me.
You said, you were only going to do it once.
Yep. And so when he got stuck in North Carolina, I got him on a Greyhound bus and got him back to the Philadelphia region.
Okay.
His mom and his aunt, when he was in Mexico, well, the plan was for him to take the flight to Florida and Florida to Philly. He got off Florida and never came back to Philly.
But he did come up eventually.
Eventually, yes, eventually. He did make his way back up here. I mean, he was down in Florida for quite some time, living on the streets, which, gosh, is heartbreaking in itself to know that someone you love is literally homeless on the streets, but trying to have boundaries.
Mm-hmm. And raise a daughter.
And raise a daughter, because at the end of the day, like, the boundaries that we have in place are to protect our own emotional wellness. And I was trying to keep myself in a good place. I mean, it doesn't negate the fact that, like, I still worried endlessly about him.
Mm-hmm.
I would hear from him here and there. He would sometimes go into libraries and use their internet, or he would use some random person's phone. So I would hear from him every so often. And then at some point this past summer, he did make his way back up to the Philadelphia region. Still not in a good place.
Did you see him at all?
At times I would see him, like, walking along one of the main streets that is near us. He was living with family that was nearby, kind of, but not really. I mean, he was bouncing between Philly and the Kensington area and Center City, and bouncing back to Phoenixville, and bouncing to Philly, bouncing to Phoenixville, and, you know, it truly is. I can't even describe how heartbreaking it is to see someone you love in that state.
I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine what that's like.
But you still have to live life. Like, I still had to work. I still had a daughter. I was trying to heal from, you know, everything that had happened. And, you know, I think you always have hope that that person will just find a way to get themselves in a good place. But unfortunately, that was not the case for Jimmy.
So then, what happened? Yeah. I'm gonna cry.
October 23rd of this past year, he did end his own life. And, that, like, there really are no words to lose someone that you love.
He lost him like 3 times.
Yeah. And, you know, you can try and prepare yourself. You can try and prepare yourself for that moment to come, but at the end of the day, there is no preparing yourself to lose someone that you love. And, I will never forget the phone call that I got that night. I mean, that leading into that day, Saturday into Sunday, it was like the middle of the night, and I had this dream, and Jimmy showed up in my dream, and you could just like feel the love in this dream. And we were hugging, and he held up his hand with his wedding ring. And I remember saying in my dream, I hope none of the decisions that I have made along the way screwed you up anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, he smiled in my dream, and we hugged. And what woke me up out of my dream was my daughter, who was sitting in her crib, crawling around searching for something and upset and crying a little bit. And that next morning, we got up, and I actually was still thinking about my dream, and I could still physically feel the love from that dream, still physically in my body. My body still felt the response of the love that I had in that dream, and I can't even describe
how
intense it was. And Jam and I took a little day trip with my sister-in-law to Jim Thorpe, and we had such a calm day. But the also weird part about it was during our ride up, my sister-in-law.
So this is Jimmy's sister.
My brother's wife.
Your brother's wife.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She was asking if I'd heard from him, and I had said, well, I haven't heard from him recently. I said, but usually when he goes in periods of me not hearing from him, there's usually some hurrah moment of something ridiculous that happened, and she'd asked me, if you found out he passed away, will you be ready for that? And I had said, no, I will not be ready for it. There's nothing that can prepare me for it. And then a few hours later, I'd gotten the call that middle of the night time frame was when he had ended his life. And
did you get a call from a detective?
I got a call from his mom. And I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. I literally fell to my knees. And was almost screaming.
Yeah.
And devastating doesn't even really actually compute of how I still feel.
Right.
And it was just a life-changing moment. And through this process, people, I think I've said before, will literally say, oh, well, you must feel relief. No, I don't feel relief. Oh, it really upset you that bad? I thought you guys were separated. Yes, we were separated. I didn't love him any less. He still is the love of my life. When two souls connect a certain way, it just hits differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just, I'm always going to love him. And there was a lot of heartbreak, and actually I wrote down this quote because shortly after receiving the news that he had ended his life, I think I said before, I like to read. Mm-hmm. And there's an author there's an author, Jodi Picoult, and in one of her books, and it was a quote that I literally had just stumbled upon. I'd read her book years ago, but it said, until this moment, I had not realized that someone could break your heart twice along the very same fault line.
Mm.
And for me, that was true, because that first half was losing him.
Oh, yeah.
To the start / the beginning of that relapse. And the second time was when he ended his life. And, you know, one thing I've learned too, like, you know, people will say you're going to move on. For me, it's not moving on. You just learn to move forward with things. And I truly believe that I'm always going to love him. Like, always. Will always love him. And I'm always going to miss him. And, you know, all I can do is try and tell Jameson, you know, the good stories and show her all the happy photos of him. And, you know, I just, I don't know.
You don't have to know.
Yeah.
Will you tell us about your tattoo?
Oh, yes. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, we can definitely. We're gonna move the camera for a moment, just so you know. Not that one, this one,
Yeah.
right? I'm
Yep,
gonna
that
see if
one.
it'll scroll a bit.
It is actually our thumbprints, my thumbprint and Jimmy's thumbprint. And it says, "Believe in today."
Oh, when I get to do this thing I've been wanting to do, I just move that down.
I used to just tell him, just believe in the day, that you can get through the day, that you can be sober, and that you're going to be okay. But at the end of the day, too, I used to just try and tell myself, just believe in the day, that you're just going to make it through the day. And, yeah, so I got his thumbprint, and I got mine, and I made it into a heart. And I know some people are like, oh, that's stupid. I don't care what other people think. For me, he will always forever be etched to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something more that I can, you know,
Yeah.
have of him.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. I have another question for you.
Yeah.
Systemically, where did we fail you?
Where did the system fail me?
Mm-hmm. Where did the system, like barriers or things that you attempted or things that you tried to do, and the system just fought you, fought him, fought the situation?
Insurance. For anyone who's had a loved one with an addiction, you know 30 days is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you're lucky if your insurance will give you 30 days. 30 days is just enough to get them over the little hump of things. But they're not ready in totality to just jump back in.
Just to cut you off, Drew Barrymore has recently come out about her addiction with alcohol. And she said that she lived in the treatment facility for 1.5 years.
If you can private pay, you can do that.
Exactly.
If you need to go through insurance, you're lucky if you get 30 days. And, you know, then, you know, there's IOP, but...
That's intensive outpatient,
Sorry.
where you go for like 4 hours a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is IOP 4 hours?
Yeah.
It's 4 hours a day, and there's like there's a psychiatrist involved, so you could get like medications with that. But IOP is again, it's only 4 hours a day. So, and you're living at home, and so you're not blocked or shielded from life.
You could be at home or you could be sober living somewhere that's not an inpatient treatment facility.
Yeah. So you could leave premises and go find what you want if you wanted to.
At one point...
They do drug test you at IOP.
Yeah. At one point, I was... Yeah, after his initial 302, I was able to get him back to an emergency room with psychosis type symptoms. And the problem was, it was after hours, so there wasn't an actual psychiatrist like physically on site, and part of his psychosis was that he thought everything electronic was being hacked, and the only thing available was telehealth.
So that means a computer screen.
Right, which he's not going to talk to. And since he wasn't willing to speak with a psychiatrist and wouldn't divulge to the ED physician at the time, and the social worker wouldn't talk to me to take my collateral, they discharged him. And shortly thereafter, he fled the state, thinking that hackers were coming after him. I mean, I fully recognize at the end of the day, you know, he was also making very specific decisions. And I used to say to him, you know, every decision you make has a consequence. And I make decisions based off the decisions you're making. And I fully also realized, too, no matter how much help he could have gotten, we still may have ended up in this same situation of him ending things.
You mean ending his life?
Yes.
Okay.
So I recognize that. And at the end of the day, too, I just need to keep trying to survive myself in all this. I don't want to create false narratives in my brain of what I could have, should have done. I tried every single avenue that I possibly could have to get him help. Yeah. Short of hog tying him and putting him in a closet, you know, I had exhausted my options, so I try really hard not to create a false narrative in my own brain that I could have or should have done something differently. That's not going to benefit me in any way.
Or that you're in any way responsible for the decisions he made.
Right. You know, I think it's easy to look back and think like, oh, well, what if I would have done it this way? Or what if I approached it that way? There's nothing I can do at this point to change any of that. You know, what I can focus on, though, is helping others in similar situations, helping others that have loved ones in active addiction, and being a resource for them, being a support system for them, and, you know, just letting them know that they are not alone. Addiction and addiction with families, it can be very isolating. And, you know, part of me being in this Pork with Them in is just helping to also just let people know, like, you're not alone. And it's okay to be sad and angry, and it's okay to feel lost. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, your recovery also is not dependent on your addict's recovery. And you can recover and work steps to get yourself in a better place, even if your addict is not.
Right.
So that's what I try and do, is to share my story and be there for others, and let them know they're not alone in their own grief of things.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for sharing.
I'm sorry it wasn't a all happy love story. There were happy moments, but I think sometimes that's life.
It is. It's real.
Yeah.
And your love for Jimmy is real.
Yes.
Right? Like, your love for Jimmy. So one of the things when I asked Brianna to come and do this, like, podcast, I said, will you come and share? And she's like, well, I don't have the Valentine's Day story, right? Like, I don't have the pink hearts and the frills and the doilies, right? She's like, this isn't... And I was like, no, actually what you have is real. Like, your love for Jimmy is intense, and it's rubber meets the road love.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you loved him passionately when you said, I can't stay here. Right?
I did.
And you continue to love him passionately, even though he said, I can't be on this earth anymore.
Yes. I still love him every single day.
I know.
Yeah.
There was something you said earlier that I'm trying to remember. And if I don't remember, I'm not supposed to.
I think too, I saw a quote somewhere and I'm paraphrasing, but it said something along the lines of, you don't know who you are until you've had to pick up the pieces as someone you love walks away. But you also don't know who you are until you've had to make a decision to walk away from the person you love. Like they're two very incredibly difficult things to go through. When you love someone tremendously, there are so moments in which you have to walk away. And that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my 37 years of life, is to walk away from the person that I thought I was going to live the rest of my life with.
You said earlier that if you hadn't been pregnant, you probably would have stayed in the
I probably would have stayed in the chaos, but there was just this innate part of me that needed to protect our daughter. Yeah, I fully think I would have stayed in that chaos for longer had I not been pregnant. But I was pregnant. And the need to protect her and have a safe, healthy place for her outweighed how I felt. Like it didn't, when you're a parent, you'll walk through fire for your child. Doesn't matter how you feel. Because at the end of the day, it's
their protection, their safety.
It's their safety at hand, their protection, their well-being.
And you were protecting her even in utero because you left a week before you gave birth.
Yep.
Because there was too much dust from him breaking up walls.
Yeah.
Walls that he found. I know. The irony in that.
The irony
I can't get over it. I just can't get over it.
The walls he put up are the walls that he brought down. Yeah. I know. Maybe that's life.
Maybe.
The walls we build are also the walls that we at times have to break down.
And sometimes good ways and sometimes bad ways.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for being here. And we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Hi. So it's the afternoon after the meeting with Bree, and she and I debriefed it a little bit, and we talked, and there were a couple of things that I felt were particularly poignant that didn't get stated because in her telling of her story, there's a whole, it's chaotic. And so there were a couple of things that got left out that I really wanted to touch on and really wanted to emphasize. And then she said if I was going to come back on with an additional thing, she's got something she wanted me to add. And she does give permission for me to say everything I'm about to say. So I wanted to let you know that Jimmy did go and seek help at a hospital in Center City. She says August, I say September. It doesn't really matter, but he went. The way she knows that is because she's his contact. When he went to the hospital, she was designated as his emergency contact. She got told he showed up at this hospital asking for inpatient treatment, and he didn't have medical insurance. And so they said, we can't give you inpatient treatment. We can give you outpatient treatment, and you need to show up at this particular provider or these particular providers. And when you tell an addict, hi, it's great you're here, now go someplace else, they're not getting someplace else. That's not how this works for them. And then, insurance is a thing, right? Insurance is a thing, and insurance stopped him from getting inpatient treatment. So there's that systemic issue. And it makes me super sad. And I wanted to clarify something, because when I first heard Jimmy died, I thought he overdosed. But I talked to Bree, and he didn't overdose. he very clearly didn't overdose. It wasn't an overdose. He clearly committed suicide. There's no doubt about that at all. And so I just wanted to clear that up too. And so Bree asked me to share that the contact for crisis and mental health concerns and overwhelm and all of it is to dial 988. When I was little, we dialed 411 and we got like information and they would tell you people's phone numbers, right? You could be like, hi, what's the number for me? And you dial 411. Now you dial 988 and you can even text it. You don't even have to dial it. You can just text the word help to 988 and a mental health provider will respond and give you support. And you can Google mental health concerns, and SAMHSA and NAMI are available to you. And so reach out. You're not alone. There's a suicide hotline number. But 988, just text 988 help and somebody will respond. Brianna just wanted to reiterate that there is support out there. And I wanted to thank you all for being a part of today's, of all of the podcasts, of supporting Brianna and listening to her story, and for being a part of Social Work Your Life. Thank you so much.